Hello and welcome to the 3D Blu-ray Bunker. This is a place for us die-hard fans of 3D where I look exclusively at 3D Blu-rays, not to do a movie review, but to focus almost entirely on the film's 3D, with just a short word at the end about the film itself. This time I'm looking at the 2012 sequel to Clash of the Titans, Wrath of the Titans. I know it's far from the only example of this, but this has a different aspect ratio to the first film, and it's an aesthetic inconsistency that I could do without, especially when it's a move from what I always think of as the more cinematic ratio of 2.39 to 1 to the more televisual shape of, in the case of this one, 1.78 to 1. But I do get that a lot of people prefer to see their TV screens filled, especially with 3D, so might welcome the change. So I think what maybe had incurred the Titans' wrath in the first place was the notoriously bad 3D when they clashed, and after that debacle, there had been talk of filming the sequel in native 3D, but the way things worked out, they shot it flat and went back to prime focus again for another 3D conversion. And if that rings alarm bells, it's good to know that the conversion team this time around appears to have been about 10 times the size of the first one, and they had more time to get the job done. And the result is that the 3D here is a lot more worthy of the approval of the residents of Mount Olympus this time. First off, at a most basic level, they've sorted out the problem of people just looking weird. So this is now fine, and it no longer looks like there's someone standing behind him, even if it does also look like his receding hairline from the first film has successfully reversed its direction and is now become an advancing hairline, advancing into 3D space maybe. So whereas the first film began with a quite promising star field and then offered nothing but weird and nasty 3D, this time the opening has a similar sort of effect but with loads of embers floating around, but then it goes on to offer a lot of good and great even 3D throughout the film, including a lot more of those embers. They must have realised that they had a good process for particle effects and were able to spread them across 3D space very effectively, so they went all in and put quite a lot of scenes into the film with embers across and into every frame, and it all looks very nice. You can also see from some of these images that this is one of those films that embraces the orange and blue look that's become rather prevalent, and I know some people are quite sensitive to it and they're not fans of it. Anyway, in this same moment, there's one of the film's great 3D shots, people being swept up and dropped by a giant monster, and we get a fairly awesome view of them falling towards the camera, with all sorts of space and separation going on in between them all. And the film does quite a few jobs of having stuff thrown towards the camera, which along with various other things, it really does make it look like they were properly thinking about how to make this look good in 3D all through the production. So thunderbolts and lightning, all very, very frightening, are hurled around the screen, in and out of it, and it's all fun 3D. Like the first film, this has some structures that look like they were designed to occupy 3D space in an interesting way, but unlike the first film, this time they actually do. So for example, I really like this scene. The cage here is nicely three-dimensional in its design, with someone trapped inside it, so he's contained within a three-dimensional prison. So that's good, but what's even better is that at the same time it's suspended high up above the ground, which also looks good in 3D. So I think this is a really smart bit of 3D filmmaking. And I also thought a lot of the film's compositions were arranged to look good in 3D, like the way the four of them are standing here. And on a pretty subtle and non-flashy level, I really like the framing here, where the two of them are nicely set into their own little alcove. It's very minor, but quite effective. There are loads of examples of this composition, and a few more are things like these chains stretching a good way into the screen, a good view of these spear-wielding troops. It's a shot that's been in a few 3D films, and it works nicely enough here. Or some of their battle structures seem like a fairly obvious design choice for 3D. And this is another really nice one. Moving among the statues here, you get a feel for the 3D space here in 2D, but this looks good in the film, especially up close, moving in between the plinths. Again, it all feels like these guys are thinking in 3D this time around. And another one of those extra effective top-down views here, just for good measure. It's such a surprise coming from the first film to enjoy quite a large amount of really nice 3D in this film. Another structure that looks like a great piece of 3D design is this globe, which has got various layers to its structure, and it looks very nice and solid and deep and detailed in 3D. And then there's something pretty awesome that happens in 3D space with the globe, and that's the camera's move inside it. This sort of thing looks great in 3D, and it's really well done here. And there are several moments like this in the film, like sliding through the rocks here, and there's also another brilliant brilliant movement deep down through rocks. It's very three-dimensionally detailed and effective stuff. And the locations are often great for 3D too, like the labyrinth is full of rocky passageways, steps, and several views which are all a perfect fit for effective 3D, maybe most effective in some of those ever-reliable top-down views, where the 3D always seems to feel a bit stronger than it maybe is, which I tend to put down to it being a view that we're less used to in real life maybe. And there's a great variation on the passageway shot, where the 3D is usually either just a simple static view of a passageway, or maybe it'll have somebody walking through it, possibly best for 3D when the camera's moving through it, tracking the character. Well, this film's new twist on a great 3D passageway shot offered here is to keep the camera and characters still, but move the passageway over them. It's another pretty awesome moment. It's not all great, as there are one or two conversion errors that crop up. Nothing serious, I thought, though. Like Andromeda's left arm behind the curtain is pulled back onto the same plane as the fabric. On the plus side, though, it's still a nice bit of 3D framing, so the good easily outweighs the bad here. And similarly, where the camera moves across the tree here, some of those branches smear across others in the wrong space. But again, aside from that, it's still a really nice 3D shot looking down from up in the tree. They even managed to keep vegetation under control, which is usually something that trips up 3D conversions, but whether it was by design or just lucky, the nature of these bushes is that they look quite solid and aren't full of individual leaves that can be put into the wrong space. It's good to see old Pegasus again, and the clouds even are also in their own separate space too, although maybe the view above the two of them feels like it could have done with a stronger 3D effect. It's a nice shot though, and there are other areas where the 3D feels like it's dialed right down, like Rosamund Pike's hair here doesn't look like it's noticeably sitting in any space further away from her face, which it feels like it ought to be. So maybe faces don't represent particularly excellent 3D in the film, and you'll have seen beards given a bit more solidity and detail in their depth in other conversions, like in Aladdin for example, although to be fair that was several years later when techniques for this sort of thing had presumably been improved. There's a huge amount of stuff being flung and blasted out towards the camera, like this monster spewing stuff a good way out, and there's lots of molten rock being lobbed about, like this stuff, which is put into nice and strong 3D space, and here ribbons of lava arc across 3D space in a very nice way. And I think my favourite bit of lava, debris, fire and depth is in this scene, which has all of that going on. Another one of the film's really strong 3D views. And quite a bit of this stuff is flung away out of the screen. There's stuff in here coming out in a brief bit of pop-out, which is sometimes done a bit more obviously, like this monster's face, which looks how you'd expect it to in 3D. Really, there's an awful lot of stuff being chucked at the camera, often amidst these great pyrotechnics. So like I said, I'm sure 3D was given a lot of thought, and they do have fun with it. I think I said earlier that I thought one of the best bits of 3D in the film was the sequence with all of those bodies falling down towards the camera, and it's good to see some great 3D on a completely different scale and without flashy CG. So like the tripwire vine here, that's obviously an important thing for him to reach, so it's kind of clever, certainly sensible for it to be placed out where it is in front of the screen, which helps to emphasise, I think, how far he has to reach out to get it. It's minor, but it is a story-assisting piece of 3D. This fella does something interesting, not just poking his pointy stick out of the screen at us, but we get a first-person view from him, and I thought this was done in a really clunky way. First off, point-of-view shots never normally feel the need to show the shape of an eye socket, and more rarely still the need to show the character blinking, but for some reason this film does both. Actually, if it's a Cyclops, is he blinking or winking? I guess that's a philosophical debate maybe. But the dumbest thing it does, and it's really strange that the first film did this as well with the Stygian witches, is to show the view from a one-eyed character's point of view in 3D. I don't know, maybe mythical monocular monsters have special powers of vision too? Anyway, it's one of those things that I think draws attention to itself and makes you wonder what they were thinking. So just a very quick word about the film itself. I'm pretty sure it's not a classically good film as such, but like the first one, I enjoyed this enough for it to have been a worthwhile watch. Sam Worthington seems to have reverted closer to his native Australian accent for some reason, and maybe Rosamund Pike's a bit wasted. Lily James certainly doesn't get as much of a showing as you might hope for, but there's some real fun with Bill Nighy, who I thought was genuinely funny, along with an entertaining turn from Tony Kebbell, and Ralph Fiennes and Liam Neeson are back chewing things up again. There's probably more depth to the visuals than there is to the story. It looks nice and gritty and textured, partly because it was shot on film and it looks all the better for it, but I'd say it's of a similar overall overall quality to the first film. That's to say, certainly watchable and sometimes enjoyable, but probably forgettable. So it's a soap opera amongst the gods, and with probably enough of the mythology's monsters making appearances. And it's similarly brief too, coming in at a tight hour and a half, so no time to get flabby. It's good enough that I'd have watched a part 3 if they'd made one, which I think was proposed as Revenge of the Titans, and definitely if it had been in 3D as solid as what's on show in this one. So I hope you found this in some way useful, and if so, I hope you'll join me again soon for another 3D Blu-ray review. Until then, thanks for looking in on this one, cheers for now, bye bye.